Okay, hello everyone. Today we're going to have a look at the myofascial system. So if we jump forward to our learning objectives, so these are the things that by the end of the session, hopefully you'll have a much better idea about. So we're going to have a look at describing the structure and function of muscle fibers and their components, the stages of the sliding filament theory, the effects of exercise intensity and duration on muscle fiber recruitment and adaptation by the different muscle fiber types. Name the locations of the attachment sites of the majority of the muscles for the body. Explain the isolated muscle actions responsible for producing specific body movements. Explain the roles of muscles in integrated movements of the body compared to their isolated muscle actions. And identify causative factors, symptoms, and recovery strategies for delayed onset muscle soreness, or DOMS. And then finally, describe the structure and function of the different types of connective tissue. So quite a lot there. We'll go through it and hopefully you'll gain a better understanding of this by the end. So first of all, this is a task that I think is really worth doing, okay, which is label the muscle structure diagram to identify as many structures as you can, okay. So on this lecture pack here, which if you need this specific lecture, you can jump onto Shobi and find that diagram and do it as a label, or just Google structure diagram of the muscle and you'll get one of these and you can print it out and you can write it on. And I find by doing this, it really helps me understand it better and remember the names a bit better. So I tend to have these diagrams, write as much as I can from memory, cover it up, look at the real version and have a few versions blanks printed out and then go back and label it again. And I keep doing that until I get all the labels, okay, without looking at the answers. So that's something that might help you with your learning. So here we go. Here's the answers. So we've got a few bits and pieces here. And if you're first looking at this sort of for the first time, this might not make a lot of sense, but hopefully by the end of this, it will. So this is your structure, okay? This is like an exploded diagram of your muscle. So you've got the epimysium, which is the main cover of the muscle. Then you go down to the perimysial, which is surrounding that next group of fibers down. Then you've got the endomysium surrounding the muscle fiber. And then you've got the sarcoplasmic reticulum, which is a bit of a mouthful. And then you've got the myofibril. And then you've got the actin and the myosin. And we're going to kind of go through these as we go through the presentation. So here's some questions that you might want to answer before we go on to the next slide. So what role do mitochondria play in muscle function? Which of the myofilaments are thick? What structure of the muscle extends to form tendons? What are the smallest contractile units of a muscle cord where actin and myosin are found? And how are these contractile units arranged in the myofibril? So they're quite difficult ones, but I would, if I was you now, jump into your manual, pause this presentation, jump into your manual and see if you can find the answers to these and write them down, okay? All of these little activities really helpful for your learning. Okay, so the first answer is that energy is released using oxygen. So the mitochondria are the powerhouses of the muscle and they release, energy is released, using oxygen. So they're your aerobic powerhouses. They produce ATP through aerobic respiration. Next, which of the myofilaments are thick? That's the myosin. So if you need to, you can jump back on the slides. And again, if you want this PowerPoint up at the same time as we're doing this and have a split screen, then that might help you as well. What structure of the muscle extends to form tendons? That's the fascia, okay? And we can talk about the fascia a little bit later on, and that's going to be included in your presentation. What are the smallest contractile units of the muscle cord where actin and myosin are found? So if you remember that diagram, exploded diagram right at the very end, actin and myosin, they're found in the sarcomere. Okay, so they're both together. Although they show them separately on that diagram, they're actually together in the sarcomere. And how are these contractile units arranged in the myofibril? So they're arranged in chains along the length of the myofibril. So you'll see chains of sarcomeres with actin and myosin inside them, and that's how the contraction occurs. So you probably won't be in pairs, you'll probably be on your own, but each explain the following principles of muscle contraction to your partner. So this is a tricky one if you haven't got anyone there, but maybe take someone that doesn't know anything about anatomy at all. So either after watching this and then doing some revision, okay, on your sliding filament theory, hopefully you covered a bit of it in your level 2, then you can look at it, go through it in your manual, and then try and explain it to someone that doesn't know this at all, okay? And you'll find, actually, if you can explain it to someone who has no knowledge of this whatsoever, it will really help you. So explain the sliding filament theory, the all or none law, or sometimes all or nothing law, size principle of motor unit recruitment as well. Okay, so sliding filament theory. We're going to go through this best as we can, and this is something I like to cover in person as well. So when we do a face-to-face day, this is one of the things that we'll look at. So the cocking phase, 4 phases. Cocking phase, ATP primes the myosin head. So I usually doodle on the board with this and get people to do activities, but the ATP is your source of energy. Hopefully you remember that. And it's the only source of energy. It's the only currency your body can accept. So think about it as the currency of energy for your body. It primes the myosin head. So there's a head on the myosin, okay, and it primes that to be able to basically stick. The binding phase. So calcium is released, excuse me, in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Troponin and tropomyosin move away from the actin binding sites, and myosin binds to actin. Okay, again, tricky to show you without the board, but I think there's a diagram on here afterwards. Then the power stroke. Think of this like oars rowing. So basically the oars have cocked back, they bound on, and now you're going to do a power stroke of the row, which is going to pull the fibers together like this. So ATP becomes ADP because you've broken a phosphate bond to create energy. Energy is released. That makes the myosin heads nod and rotate. So think of them like the oars. So they nod and rotate. Sarcomere shortens and contracts as actin is drawn over myosin. So think of them like this. They're sitting like this. The oars bind onto them, pull them together like this, and they shrink. And that's what contracts the muscle, because that happens all the way along that chain. And that means that the whole muscle then starts to shorten, which is your contraction, okay? ATP binds to myosin heads, releasing them from the actin binding site. So again, ATP comes in, binds to the myosin heads, which allows them to release their binding, and you're going to go back to the normal muscle length. So that's how it happens. And I was going to say, I hope there's a diagram afterwards, but there isn't. So a bit of a morbid way of thinking about this is what happens when someone passes away is they don't have ATP anymore. They're not producing it anymore, obviously, because their body's not functioning. And this is where rigor mortis comes in. So because you haven't got the ATP, the muscles bind and don't release because of the ATP until they start to break down. So that's what rigor mortis is. That sets in when we no longer produce ATP to allow the muscles to reset. Like I say, a bit more, but it helps me remember it. So the all or nothing law. Motor units contract maximally or not at all. So what is a motor unit? Okay, so we can say that, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't understand what that is. So a motor unit, again, you cover it a little bit in level 2. It is a group of fibers or myofibrils and a motor neuron. So one neuron, and as you can see from the diagram there, it connects to a load of different myofibrils, or muscle fibers. And that one motor neuron will fire all of those muscle fibers, and it will do it or it won't do it. There's no half firing or quarter firing. It will fire those regardless. So the size principle is the motor units are recruited from the smallest to the largest, depending on the amount of force required. So it will start with small motor units. So maybe like this one motor neuron is connected to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 fibers, say. And it will fire that first. Then what it will do is it will start to work up the motor units until it fires one that has 100 muscle fibers on it, okay? And that will create more force because it's more fibers. So that's all it is, okay? All or nothing, either contracts or it doesn't. And motor size principle starts with the smallest set of motor units up to the largest, depending on what you're asking it to do. So if I want to pick up a pencil, that's a very small recruitment task. If I want to do a leg press, that's a much bigger force requirement. And so therefore I'm going to recruit starting with a few and then up to my big motor units. So muscle fiber type revision. What are the 3 types of skeletal muscle fibers? Again, I'd encourage you to get your manual out, read through your manual, find these in your manual and answer these questions. How do each of the fiber types differ in characteristic? How do each fiber types adapt to endurance training? And how do each fiber types adapt to strength training? Okay, so let's have a look at the answers. So we've got our fiber types. So we've got white. Okay, sorry, start again. I'm going to go back. We'll go for type 1 fibers, type 2A and type 2B. So if you think type 1 is your slow twitch fibers, type 2A and 2B, intermediate and fast. Now, some of the characteristics of each of these is, as you can see there, rich in oxygen supply for the type 1, aerobic, rich in mitochondria, because we said earlier that mitochondria is the powerhouse of aerobic respiration in the muscle. Lower force production, so because you're asking it to do a lot of repetitive movements, it won't produce as much force, but they take a longer time to fatigue. So that's what we're looking at with your type 1 fibers. Type 2B, and there's a reason I'm going in this order, are white because they're without oxygen. They're not a very good blood supply, so therefore that's why they're white. Anaerobic activity, so sprinting or high intensity or weight training. Low in mitochondria because they don't need them. Higher force production because they're your power muscles, your fast ones, and they're quick to fatigue, so they don't last very long because they haven't got that oxygen supply. Now, type 2A fibers are faster than type 1, but they can switch. So with training, type 2A can have more characteristics of type 1 fibers. They don't completely change over. What they do is they develop more of the characteristics. Or if you're doing more of type 2B training, so your explosive weight training, sprinting, then your type 2A fibers are going to become more like type 2B. So they're interchangeable. Okay, so think of them like that. They don't completely change. They're still always a type 2A, but they pick up characteristics. Okay, so now we're on to the muscles. So let's have a look at individual muscle activity, and let's look at labels as many of the posterior and anterior muscles as you can. So front and back view. Okay, anterior front, posterior, obviously the rear. Label as many of those muscles as you can. Again, I would do the same thing. I would label as many as you can just from memory. Then what I would do is go back and look at a diagram with the answers on, cover it up, label some more, and keep doing that process until you've learned all the muscles. So what they're going to do is look at origins and insertions. And there you go, it's labeled it for you. It's page 25 to 28 of your manual. And find each of those in the table on yourself. Locate the origin insertion where possible and work out the concentric muscle action by contracting each muscle before checking your answers. So again, this is using yourself as the body. So you might look at your bicep and you might look at the origin and the insertion of the muscle. Remember, origin is the one generally closer to the center of your body, okay? And then the insertion is at the end of the muscle. So do that. Think about the contraction. So if it's bicep, I've got my insertion up here in the head of the humerus, and then it comes down here to the just below your elbow. Oh, sorry, my brain had gone to sleep then. Just below the elbow, okay? And we know that the contraction is a bicep curl. So that's what we're looking for there. In pairs. So your tutor will allocate an exercise, compound movement, break down the exercise, compound movement into individual joint actions. Identify the muscle actions and facilitate each movement, including the agonist, antagonist, synergist, and fixator. So this is a task for practical day when I see you. So this will be one of the things that we'll do face to face. And then also this activity, okay? But you can think about this on your own, decide on sport or activity to analyze. Think about the key movements of that sport, all right? And then break down into the joint actions and identify which muscles are used, again, for the same thing. Agonist, antagonist, synergist, fixators. Okay. So moving on to some questions. What is DOMS? What are the symptoms of DOMS? what exercises are likely to cause DOMS? When is DOMS, or when are DOMS likely to occur? Are there any prevention or recovery strategies for DOMS that may be useful? So this is something that your clients are going to experience, something you will have experienced if you've done different types of training. Aches and pains, stiffness in the muscle usually occurs 24 to 72 hours after exercise. So usually it can be quite soon afterwards, but usually it's the day after or even the day after that. And the specific causes are unclear, but could be muscle spasm, micro tears, inflammation, or an influx of enzymes into the fatigued area. Or most likely it could be a combination of those things. So inflammation, micro tears, enzymes, training that might increase risk of DOMS, eccentric loading, so loading, extending the muscle under load, unfamiliar exercise, so something new that you haven't asked your muscles to do before, or significant intensity programs. Okay, all of these things can cause DOMS, and this is why they're not 100% sure about the specific causes. What it's unlikely to be, and it gets called a lot, is lactic acid in the muscle. A lot of people go, oh, I've got loads of lactic acid in the muscle. That's not true. Okay, what it is lactic acid actually gets taken out of the muscle within about 90 seconds of stopping exercise. Okay, and certainly the next day there's not lactic acid there left over from the workout you've just done. There is an increase in acidity in the muscle after exercise, and then again, unclear whether that's exactly what causes it, but again, it might be one of the causes. But actually, you've broken down lactic acid a long time ago. As soon as you go aerobic again, you start to break down lactic acid. So that is a break, not a permanent problem. So DOMS prevention, how can we try and reduce DOMS or stop it? There's no, once you are sore in your muscle and you've got DOMS, there's nothing really that seems to completely cure it, but you can help reduce it slightly. So recovery strategies, cold treatment, hot treatment, massage, okay, sports massage. Prevention strategies, cooling down and stretching fully at the end of your workout. That seems to help. Resting the affected body part for 1 to 2 days after the session. Gradual exercise progression and gradual introduction of unfamiliar exercises. Now, personal experience, I also find that what you should add to that is active recovery. So recovery strategies, rather than just doing nothing. Actually, I'm not sure that's as useful as doing something. So if you've done a heavy weight training session, I would suggest the next day that the person does a nice light walk, goes for sort of a long enough walk that's going to warm them up, take about 45 minutes, really low intensity, and that might do it. Or jumping on a bike or a cardiovascular piece of machinery, and like I say, going really light, barely moving the needle on the heart rate, 60%, 65%, flushing the muscle through with fresh blood, I find is the best cure for some of my DOMS if I get them. Prevention, the last two to me are ones when I'm working with clients that actually seem to make the biggest difference in reducing DOMS or preventing it from happening. So gradual exercise progression, making sure it's nice and slow, leaving 1 rep in the tank. Unless they're really specific looking for hypertrophy, I tend to minimize the eccentric loading a little bit, okay, until they're much more conditioned to training. And gradual introduction of unfamiliar exercise. So just change little bits at a time, going back to those fit principles, but just little things at a time so that they're not too sore after their training. So those things I find help the most for me and for my clients. Okay, so jumping on characteristics of ligaments, this one sort of jumps forward, okay. Connecting bone to bone. So that's the feature of a ligament, or a characteristic of a ligament. It connects bone to bone, tendons, muscle to bone, ligaments, bone to bone. Made of collagen and elastin. Collagen increases the toughness and the strength. The fibers are resistant to stretch. They don't really stretch much, and you don't want them to. Elastin increase elasticity and stretch. Fibers allow stretch and return to original shape, but again, they don't move tons, ligaments. They're there to create form, structure, and stability. As it says there, support and add stability to the joints. They have a poor blood supply, so actually when they get injured as well, they are a bit of a pain to heal because of that. They can be intra or extra capsular, so they could be inside the knee joint, like the cruciate ligaments, or they could be outside, the knee, any joint, but the knee joint is a good example. Okay, like your lateral collateral ligament, which goes over the side. So that's kind of your characteristics of ligaments. Tendons, on the other hand, connect muscle to bone, and they emerge from the connective tissue and insert to the bone via the periosteum. So they sit on the outside of the bone, they insert. They have a shiny white appearance, have a poor blood supply, slightly better than, because they're connected to the muscle, than ligaments, but again, a pain if you damage them, and are formed mainly from collagen with some elastin. And tendons have a rebound quality. If you start going further into your physiology and your sports performance, you'll see that actually with sprinters and power athletes, they look to use that tendon rebound to create extra spring and extra power. So you might find a lot of really explosive athletes aren't so keen on static stretching, but especially in the muscle groups that they use for explosiveness. So you'll find that they'll do more dynamic stretching and those kind of things, and PNF, to avoid overstretching the tendon. Then we've got cartilage. It's dense, durable, and can withstand compression forces. It's formed from collagen and elastin. You can see a sort of a pattern emerging here, and has a poor blood supply. So these are your shock absorbers. Okay, 3 types: hyaline, fibro, and elastic shape. Articular cartilage found on the ends of bones. So that's your padding for the end of your bones. Fibro, pads of fibrocartilage between some joints, and then elastic, found in tubes and areas which need to maintain a shape. Okay, so you've got 3 there. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that section. Obviously, feel free to re-watch this video. Hopefully now, if you look at those learning objectives that we said at the beginning, they're listed down here, and hopefully you have a bit more of an idea. In terms of some of the things that we've gone over slightly quicker than we would in the face-to-face, which we'll do in those face-to-face, naming the locations and attachment sites and major muscles. A lot of that is a case of you just going through and doing what I said about the diagrams and covering up and rewriting and looking at yourself when you're training and trying to name those things. I find that doing those in a practical setting really helps me. If you're more of a reading and writing type learner, then go back to your manual and start studying them there. But again, if you're visual or kinesthetic, point to them on yourself, especially when you're training. You should be able to feel them when you're in the gym, obviously, that you're working that muscle, and then try and think about the origins, insertions. Maybe take that sheet with you. That really helps me. And again, that's the same with any of the anatomy when you're trying to remember stuff, writing it down, trying it all different ways, reciting it, teaching somebody else, all of those things you should try to help get that into your head. So thanks for going through this presentation with me. I hope this video has helped you. And if you can just hit like and subscribe on the videos as well, that would be great. If you need any more of your learning resources, this presentation will be on Shobi, so you'll be able to re-refer to it, and hopefully you can go back through it and go back through it with this video as many times as you need until you feel like you've got the understanding. Okay, thanks very much, and I will see you on the next one.